Okay, so what we're going to do first is we're going to talk about countermelody versus harmony. Monday we talked about melody, and again, melody. The real requirement for a melody is whether it's really catchy or it's just somewhat bland. Is that the melody has to somewhat stand on its own, and it has to establish some sort of repetitive motion in order to be considered some form of melody. If it's a little too progressive and it never comes back around again, it doesn't really establish itself as well as a melody. Now, from the bland to the very catchy, you could have a very bland melody. Maybe your melody is just as simple as, ba, ba, da, ba, da, and that's it. But if your melody is very moving and maybe it's more catchy, it's ba da da da, ba da da da, ba da da da, ba da da. And you do it again. And you establish a repetitive motion for the melody, so it's somewhat singable. That breaks us into how we find the difference between a counter melody and a harmony. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to throw up a really, really simple melody up on here and cycle it back to, whoops, sorry, the keyboard's offline. Cycle it back to a harmony versus your counter melody. So just save this as. Oh, melody. Oh my God. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of like we did last week or Monday, I'm just going to use, again, my easy go-to on these ID8s is just because they can get a simple set of sounds going for us, and then we can swap them out for something more intricate after the MIDI's developed. And so I'm just going to build 3, and I'm going to make a melody, harmony, and a counter melody. And again, like we did the other day, I don't want you to, I want you to be able to have like a free, clean palette, so I'm not going to develop chords until these are established, and I'll develop chords beneath them. I mean, realistically, the melody and the harmony with the counter melody will begin to develop what the chords should be. So I'm going to go ahead and switch to blocks because I would like for you to get used to using blocks in this kind of form. And so maybe I'll just call this, the verse, and that's where I'm going to start off. Now I'm going to move to 4-bar phrase, make sure I loop it, tell my click to give me an active click, and then just make sure this rolls. Maybe I'm going to tap tempo. Somewhere like that. All right, and then before I jump into going nuts with this, I'm going to switch my sound. Oh, there it is. Oh, wrong one here. All right, what I am going to do is I'm actually going to switch to 6/4. I think I want to do a swing feel with this. It's going to change my bar setup. 6/4 is just the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 kind of feel. Although I might. let's do it 6/8. 6/8 is going to move it faster. Essentially, it's kind of double time. Let's see. That'll work for me. All right, so a couple things from the stuff that we did last week or Monday. One of the big things I'm going to have to do here, you kind of hear some overlap. I'm going to want to set these to a but of course I want to quantize them first. Again, you can use Command K for quantize, but you just have to double check what the quantize settings are. So I'm just going to use a simple basic Command K. Hopefully that gets me there. All right, and then what I'm going to do is go ahead and select that again, right? And then we're going to go to legato adjustments. I want all these guys side by side, except there is a break somewhere. Where is it? Oh, it's right here. I don't know if you want that. Okay, yeah, that'll be fine. So I'm just going to do side by side. Try that now. And you can hear the, because of the velocity right there, on that note, it kind of stabs it a little bit. I'm just going to back it off so it doesn't do it. I think even this one's a little. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave this. And I'm going to extend. So I did the but one thing you notice is that this one doesn't go all the way to the end of the bar. So I want to make sure this one goes down to the end. And then we have a nice little repeat. All right, so it looks like everybody's in place there. So I want to make sure I get that lined up before I build a counter or a harmony. So obviously, so there's my established melody. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make block 2. This will be, I'm just going to call this verse 2. It's literally going to be the stacking of verse 1. So I'm just going to copy paste this in, move it over to verse 2. So Command C, Command V, just got to drop it in the right position. Again, we're going to a 4-bar. So now if I want to do a harmony, 2 things I could do is I could just copy paste this, drop it down into the harmony lane, and go pick out those notes. We could also make an adjustment to it, but I think I know which ones I want. So I want, pretty much I want, let's see. Let me just change the sound. Almost there, okay. All right, let's try that. Let's try that note instead. Now, a couple different options here. if I were to look at these side by side, so here's the harmony, and if you were to look at this on a notation from a notation standpoint, you could see here's what I started with is in the first, and the melody I just used a basic. I'm playing C to C. So when we jump over here, you could see it's basically I did C with an octave down to B. So when I look at the harmony, I should be able to. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this over here so that I can see it. This is only for the purpose of you being able to identify it. I'm going to copy the MIDI notes themselves and jump back into the prior. So at the note level, not at the clip level, jump back into the prior piece of MIDI and paste it there so you can see it. Okay, so hopefully you can see the difference between the ones that are darkly outlined and the ones that are not highlighted. So here's the melody. Here's the harmony. Could you tell what interval I'm using right here? Between this note and this note, the C and the E.
Say intervals?
Yeah, what kind of interval is this? It's like the chord. When we were looking at the chord, when we were building triads, we're building chords. If I said the first to the third, or the first to the fifth, or the first to the seventh, that's the interval. How far?
One to the fifth?
Yeah, this one's to the third, because the third is how many steps from the first? Do you remember?
It's about 2.5.
Yeah, it's two. Two. So like if you were to count this from C to E, you go half, 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 half. Oh, there's two. So there's your third. Make sense?
Yeah.
All right. Now, so my options here are when I'm picking harmonies, when I'm choosing what my harmonies were. I did these very quickly in my head while I was working on these as I was playing it out. I could hear what I wanted. That's a third. So here's the third. Oh, I'm sorry. Here, let me mute this one since the harmony's playing twice. Here's the third. If I decided to play a fifth, it would be G, and it would be this. It would sound like this. Problem with the fifth, a lot of times is the fifth is used to do, when you do the harmony on the fifth level, a lot of times it's a little less moving. It doesn't move along with the main line as much. So because I wanted to pick something that would move with the main line a little more effectively, I chose a third. Because when you move with the fifths, it sounds, well, they call it parallel fifth motion, but essentially it's way too blockish. It doesn't feel good to do it. So a lot of times it's easier to do the third. So what I did differently here about this is that, like, this is the melody here, and I went from C, jump to the octave C, to B, so a half step down here. So from here to here is a half step down. Up here, in order for the third to follow, you can't go a half step down because the half step down is not in the key. I'm playing in the key of C right now. So if I hit this half step down, it would have been this. And it doesn't fit the key, so what I do instead is I have to follow the key, and so it should be actually a full step down here in this instance to make that interval work. And what the difference is there is the third in the major third, which is the first third we started out with, this major third here with C, from C to E, which is 2 full steps, doesn't work on every chord of the system because only the C chord, the first chord, fourth chord, and the fifth chord. So C, F, and G are all major chords. But everything else is a minor chord, and the B is a diminished chord because of the location. Remember the location on the keys, which means like when I walk down here to this B, so notice in the harmony, or the melody, I walk down to a B. In order to play the third here, it has to stay a minor third. Because a major third would be out of the key. Right, remembering that the key, because I'm playing in C, will dictate what's going on with the movement. So that's how that stacks out. And if you listen to it, it just feels better. The one thing I did differently here, though, is here's the melody. Here's an octave jump. Back to the B, the half step down. What I didn't do with this, the harmonies, I didn't do an octave jump. Because notice my octave is E. And on its next note, instead of doing an octave jump to E, I could have done a jump to E. What I did instead is I looked at, oh, okay, so you're jumping to C. Right, that octave jump down to C, I was thinking about, well, what feels a little better transitionally? And actually what I did instead is I used the A. So this is a little intricate, but it feels good. I used the A as if it was part of the melody. So like if this wasn't here, I'm just going to delete this for a second. If this wasn't here, and if this wasn't here, and we just looked at just the melody, and instead of playing the octave leap, I played just this, that's what it would sound like. And what I did is I kind of used an alternate option for the melody. Instead of straight harmonizing everything, I just use this one as a passing tone, but it's part of the harmony itself. So the harmony itself is doing this part. So it's not as let's just say it's not as blockish as just saying I'm going to use thirds as my harmony the whole way and go like make a melody and then just put every harmony at the third, because it doesn't always feel good. Does that make sense? Because the difference here is if I were to jump down the octave, so here's this. Let me jump down the octave. Right now, this is an exact third copy. Hear how it feels like it jumps, it goes, ooh, everybody goes down. So we're trying to avoid making everybody go down by keeping one of the parts up a little higher. I mean, you could have technically could do something like la. You could even jump up. And here's the difference here is notice it, see how tight this pattern is right here, how close they are together? It's going to make the harmonies feel small. And by doing this next step, it's going to jump really wide, and then it's going to go small again. So the only downside to doing this kind of leap, moving this guy up, although it makes it feel like we're not, essentially there's a concept called parallel motion, which means if everybody's moving together, it feels a little weak, it's not as strong. So what we do is try to break them up, try to send them in different directions in order to, contrary motion as they call it, in order to make sure that there's a little more depth to what's going on. But this spread, going back to the tight pattern, it's going to sound a little funky because it just, for that one moment, it jumps and then it comes back. So here out, just for that quarter note, it's just a little too wide, which is why, again, in this instance, I elected to, instead of doing that, I elected to keep it near the range and not as far. So notice even the spacing here. And it's kind of like, it's almost like mixing. You're used to mixing audio. It's just like panning, okay? If everybody's riding down the center, it's very mono. You start spreading them out, it starts to get big. Same thing with the pitch orientation. When you're looking at your MIDI, if your pitch orientation's got a nice spread, it essentially feels nice and full. Downside to it is if it gets spread out too far, just like in stereo, if things are too far left, too far right, they're not congruent. They're not essentially making a one overall sound that blends together, so you have to have something somewhere in the middle. That's why when you write like your 4 parts, what you'll do is you'll have probably a big spread on top and bottom, and you'll need to fill in those other parts towards the middle. But again, notice tight, this is a little wider, and it goes back to tight. Now, dynamically, just as a tip, we'll talk about this a little more later too when you're writing your parts. In the same way in a mix, you make things more mono. So like maybe let's say we make the verse more mono so that when we get to the chorus feels more stereo, because if everything was super wide stereo for the whole song, everything would just be kind of flat. What you do is you kind of mono some of the parts, kind of centralize them a little more in the verse, so when you hit the chorus it feels wider and bigger. Same thing you do with your parts. You're going to go small to go big. Does that make sense? Yeah. So that's also why we stack on a simple melody, we'll stack on a first harmony, maybe we come back around again on it. We stack more harmonies, but maybe they're octaves away. So it really adds that dynamic. So moving on, you can see, all right, from the rest of this is all parallel motion. You can see it's parallel motion because here's the melody, and all I did was make a third using thirds, and I'm literally following it pretty much the whole way. The only difference here is, when we look at this part right here, so this is all parallel right here. What we could do instead on this harmony is we could take something different here. We could do something else here. So let's say we decided to do the 5th. Right now we're on the 3rd. If I slide up to G, let's see, where is it? I can't see it. Oh, I'm up the octave. How'd that happen? Oh, am I on? Oh, I'm not on E, I'm on C. Or it was on C. Oh, that's what I could do, is I could go back to C. So this last note in the melody is actually G, or no, it's F. So what I do here is I want to land on something that fits inside of that F chord, which could be anybody, F, A, or C. I'm sorry. So I could choose C. Now, originally I chose A, but notice it's a third. So if I move up, I can move up to the C. So listen to the difference. Versus, now I think it lands a little better on this, which is why I originally chose it, but there's still the options of what you want to do there. Now notice this is still parallel motion. Parallel motion is going to help you, although it gets a little bland. Using parallel motion on the one side does help you establish what clearly the melody is. Problem with contrary motion in your harmonizing is when you're using too much contrary motion, if the voicing is equal, okay, let's say pop music, okay? You have a lead singer, they're singing along, normally you can identify their voice. If that lead singer uses another singer to be their person that harmonizes, it's very clear to follow the lead. As soon as they harmonize to themselves, they have to be lowered in the mix. The harmony has to be lowered in the mix enough to make sure we still follow which one's the lead. But in an ensemble, essentially what happens in an ensemble, a lot of times the lead part and the harmony part are somewhat balanced. So we have to just make sure that we keep a clear eye on showing the listener what the melody is supposed to be. Because if we did contrary motion, which we could do as the harmony, we could do this, where the melody goes like this. Or I'm sorry, the melody goes. And I just made the harmony go. I doubled up on this note. You'll hear how small it gets. And I could technically make that, if I jump this. I could jump it below, where the harmony goes. But you hear how convoluted it sounds. It's like you can't tell where the melody went from the harmony there. Kind of sounds a little confusing. So in some instances, it's easier to set it up as parallel motion because of the fact that it's going to be more clearly identifiable to the listener where the melody's going. All right, now that we've established that, let me get rid of this. What was this one? I think I swapped out an A. I'm going to get rid of these guys and separate these again like we had them. Here's the melody. Here's it with the harmony. Right? So those are those two, harmony and melody. They're moving together. They're working together. Their notes are specifically based upon each other, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down and make a counter melody. And the counter melody, in order for it to be a counter melody, it has to be a new melody. It doesn't fit the mold of the original melody, rhythmically or pitch-wise, and it doesn't just harmonize to what's going on. So clearly the harmony is outlining pitches from the melody. This counter melody will be completely different. So let me figure out something. Let's see. I'm sorry. All right, so I'm just going to jump in. Let me give that some quantization. And then let me make sure that the, I'm sorry, it's a, oops, I don't know what just happened. F8 is going to give us our tool window. I want to make sure these again are a butt. You can see some of the overlaps. It's just because of the speed that it's played. Like if you accidentally hold on to the key too long. So I'm just going to make these side by side a butt. Oh, except for one. No. This one. Oh, that's why. Let me. It's not quantizing correctly. Let's see. Oh, that's why, because it's a syncopated motion. Ugh. It's still a little off. What I'm going to have to do is, let's see. What I'm going to have to do is get rid of this for a sec. Take a look at the. Okay, there we go. So I'm just going to literally I'm going to replace this. Sorry, the syncopated motion kind of makes it a little difficult on here. And then I just want to extend this. So here's what happened here. Just see if this is. Yeah, just going to lower their velocity just a touch. All right, so what I've established here is now if you were to look at this compared to, if you were to look at this compared to the other parts, we've established a counter melody, which is different than what we see here in the melody and the harmony. So what I'm going to do is let me duplicate this. I'm going to drop this in here, these MIDI notes in here. So here, right now, you can see, here's the original melody, here's the counter melody. See how different it is? But yet, watch what happens. And most counter melodies are going to kind of do this, work a little well. They don't have to. What the counter melody actually is doing is, this is different all right here. All of a sudden right here, what does this look like? Compared to this, the original melody, looks like a harmony. What does this look like compared to the original melody? It looks like a harmony. And then we slide down and we see how the counter melody breaks out again. And what we could do, there's a couple things we could do with this. If we didn't want this, if we don't want any part or any remnants of the melody or the anything that looks like a harmony in the counter melody, we could either just delete it, like omit it altogether. We could make it so the counter melody is only just this part, and it rests throughout after that. The other thing we could do is we could say, all right, well, we like that, but what we want to do is let's put this. Actually, let's put this. And we could duplicate that rhythm and let that repeat underneath. That syncopated rhythm's still off. Where is it? So if we go back, I'm going to close this just so we go back to the loop. And I just need to fix that one note. I realized that. Should be there. Should belong there. And what we could do is we could even go, we could do something like this. I'm just thinking it. I'm going to duplicate this. Again, I'm just adding on to the counter melody. And again, you know, you're seeing, all right, well, this is clearly not the same as the melody. And if it stands up on its own, You know, where this guy. So there's your. There's countermelody versus harmony. Now here's the catch. Okay, if we do this, even though it's an established countermelody, the countermelody can easily take the melody. And what that means is, let's say we do this. From a part standpoint, I'm just going to mute this guy for a sec. So harmony's out for a second. Just melody and countermelody. So what's happening there is we're dropping the melody and we're only going to the counter melody for a period of time. At instances in time where the counter melody is the only melody that's going on, even though it's still technically the counter melody, because it's taking over the main melody, it becomes the melody, right? And if we did it for a long period of time and then we brought the, let's say we did it like this. Let's say we did a couple phrases of this and then we brought in the original melody. The original melody could be considered a counter melody if this is the established melody. The other question is who's the harmony playing to? If the harmony is playing to this, it's clearly this is the melody. If we make a harmony for this, and essentially without a harmony for this melody, it'll clearly establish that this is the new melody. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
The supporting chords also kind of follow the group, but they're going to follow more closely the original melody. So that's kind of something you have to look at, counter melody versus melody. So when you're making your sections today, like a lot of times what we run into is when you're going to do 4-part, you essentially generate 4 parts. But the problem with it is that if all those parts are in parallel motion, a lot of times, or even in a contrary motion, doing the same thing makes it really boring. You know what I mean? So like they're not. Essentially, what happens is if I say, "Hey, this is my melody," and I stack 3 harmonies of it, or 2 harmonies of it, and then the third one I do maybe an octave of it. Okay, it doesn't really establish it as a melody anymore. Now all of a sudden it just feels like chords, right? Because we took what was a melody and we made it harmonies, so many harmonies for it that it just feels like all we're doing are chords. So what we want to do is we want to establish a melody. We may establish a harmony, but we want to establish the rest of the parts underneath to have something movement-wise going on that makes it feel like we're doing less than just, or more than just outlining the chord. You know what I'm saying? So we kind of have to decide, let's say, a great example. If the writing some sort of contrary part and not like contrary motion meaning, again, moving away from each other, versus parallel motion, meaning moving together, or not even away from each other. Contrary could be towards each other, but essentially meaning opposing, like this, or parallel like this. We're talking about contrary part writing in terms of it's a contrary rhythmic thing, which means that like if the just great example, if the melody is elongated and we want to stack chords underneath it, if we elongate all those chords, it just sounds like blocks of chords. You know what I mean? It just sounds like us going like this. Where's the melody? You know what I mean? Where's the melody? Pick it out. It doesn't exist. Because it's just stacked chords. And if maybe we did have a melody in there, but we just stacked it so far, harmony-wise, that it just doesn't stick out. So what happens is the best way to do it is if we want an elongated, like this original melody, we want an elongated melody. Best bet on how to build around it, contrary motion or contrary part writing rhythmically, If it's an elongated melody, what do we do with the outlining chords or the other parts to make the melody be a very clear melody? We make the other parts move faster, and they do less. They may even be arpeggios, which may be doing more, but they may just go. Hear how that works out? And if we make it move, again, outlining chords. Sorry. Dang it, I forgot where I was. Oh. Single notes, you know, but rhythmic, instead of just going. You could do this, but it makes it a little more undefined who the melody is, right? So when you add that movement. The other thing you could do is you could do arpeggios, and you could do something like this. I'll start waiting for it to come back. I guess it's going to have to move. Let's see. Just again, it's outlining the chord frame. Now, actually, this is more of a counter melody if we did something like this. Even if we had done the same. Well, let's say we do something like that. I'm actually going to copy paste all this, and then I'll delete the rest on block 3. Oops, sorry, I spelled that wrong. Boom, okay. And I'm going to get rid of this counter melody. Jump back here with our loop set here and here. Let me see. Da, 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 da. Let me undo that real quick. Something about how. Yeah, that didn't work out so well. They should just be standard on the bar. Okay. So there's my new Countermelody. And notice, you know, there essentially what you're going to do when you're writing your 4 parts is you probably establish a melody and a counter melody, and you can establish a harmony to the melody, and then you could just use your bass line, your low end, to outline the chords. That's how a lot of times. So when we get there, we're going to talk a little bit more about it when we get there this morning. But essentially, the easy way to do a 4-part is to really have an established melody in one of the parts, and then use your low end, the bass part, to outline the bass note or the root note of the chords. So instead of having full chords underneath, you're going to have some outlining of the chords by single notes down in the bass, and maybe some additional down in the cello. But we can establish that, you know, that kind of feel there. So we go back to opening this up. And depending on what you do with the actual pitch, we could go up. Could go down. You kind of see how that works out, right? Just kind of establishing some sort of revolving thing. Now, the beauty of it is when you're building these parts, and the thing that I like about it, if you keep them in loop mode, there's a couple ways you can really tackle this. You could do it like the way that I just did it. I was kind of being thoughtful, putting some parts together. But if you leave it in loop mode, one of the things that you get to do, it might help you in the development of your parts when you get there, is you can very easily go, let's say I do it over here in verse. Well, actually, you know what, no, you know what, I'll do a new one. This will just be verse 4. Let's say I write a new part here. I'm going to move to 4-bar. Okay, so we're still in 4-bar section here. I'm going to leave it in a loop. Give it click and pre. But watch what I can do if I go to, before I really start breaking these parts out. I'm going to work on just the melody. All right, so watch how this works. Sorry, wrong one. Now, as soon as that passage goes by, what I can do is I can quantize it immediately if I want to hit Command K. And barring that it doesn't do it wrong, what I can do is immediately I can go down to the bottom here and hit dub. Alt's going to mute the previous, but if I hit dub, it's going to stack it on. And it's going to throw me a new lane inside of the same instrument. And now all of a sudden I'm recording to the new lane, which means if I want to make the new idea, I can go ahead and just do it in loop form. I'm out of actually. And then of course I can quantize that again. Command K, dub on a new one. Maybe I go down the octave. Okay, so I'll have to change that a little bit. Yeah, I'm going to have to go back and fix that because I hit a bad note. But, you know, you want to add your extra part on. All right, and then I just got to go clean this up because I think the part that I was trying to play here. I got messed up. Sorry. Sorry, this is what it should look like. For some reason it didn't do it that way. But all right, go back and do that bass part real quick. And you notice I could just, as long as I have them selected out here. All right, and we'll just should be able to. Sorry, I just got to kind of clean it up a little bit after the parts are done. There we go. So now I have, the bass line, the kind of the mid cello line, and then the harmony, the melody and the harmony. So what I could do with these is I could split these off. And let's just say, easy way to do it I always find, as soon as you stack that up, go ahead and just duplicate the same track for as many times as you need it. And then just delete, you're going to delete out note lanes that you're not using. So So now we're back to just these parts, and this is essentially going to be, violin, viola, cello, bass. Or in this instance, you could make it. You could make this cello and make this on viola too. It would just be the difference between taking this up the octave. Well, okay, we could switch these. There's a little bit of a trick here. We're going to talk about the octaves, but oh, maybe I had that right. Hold on, let's see. Sorry, wrong note at the end. All right, so that's kind of coming together, right? Making some sense. Part writing, all I had to do in order to make that really work is I'm using the loop function, and then I'm using the dub function. So let's take a look at, let's take a look at the next thing here. So that's Countermelody versus harmony. What I want to talk about, so there's a beautiful thing there. So I'm going to keep this. Let me actually stop this, and I'll